word justice conjures up many different images in the mind. Perhaps you see a judge or a courthouse in your thoughts, or perhaps a criminal behind bars. You may see legal documents and lawyers, a police officer arresting a criminal. You could think of an angry crowd demanding social change. All of these things are representative of justice. During our class, we have learned about various philosophies that seek to understand human nature. These philosophers want to get beyond the simple definitions of justice and ask questions on a deeper level. They would consider, for example, what is a just man? Is justice a part of our morality? Is justice for society the same as justice for the individual? Or does justice affect ethical choices in life? This video will attempt to answer some of these questions by discussing the views of two important minds. One of these minds comes from ancient Greece and has had a large influence on Western philosophy. His name was Plato, and he was born over 2,400 years ago. He was a student of another Greek philosopher, Socrates, and founded an academy of learning in the city-state of Athens. Socrates' untimely death by poison as a punishment by the leaders of Athens would have an effect on the young follower Plato. He would use the voice of Socrates in his various writings to describe his own personal theories on philosophy. The other great mind we will discuss is Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoyevsky. Born in Moscow in 1821, Dostoyevsky would become recognized as a great novelist, essayist, and philosopher through works such as Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Notes from the Underground, and The Brothers Karamazov. Dostoyevsky is regarded as one of the leading Russian authors. His keen insight into the hearts and minds of mankind shows an interest in human nature. His psychological approach to discussing the dark recesses of the mind show how individuals are affected by social, spiritual, and political forces. Both of these philosophers share some of the same ideas regarding justice. They also have differences. We will begin with Plato's The Republic, which is generally regarded as an analysis of justice. Plato, as we discussed earlier, uses Socrates as his voice in the writing. Socrates gets into a series of debates with friends over what it means to be a just person. Socrates is asked by a host of characters, is it better to live justly or unjustly? Does being just promote happiness? What defines a just person? These questions are laid out in dialogues between Socrates and his colleagues. Socrates provides questions and answers and uses various methods to prove or disprove ideas. This is called the Socratic method, and it is used to stimulate critical thinking. It should be important to note that justice, as discussed in the Republic, is addressing a concept that is more akin to righteousness regarding the conduct of people and governments, not the literal sense implied by the English word justice. I will describe it as I understand it, that it is the doing of right things towards others. This is what I think Plato is implying. It appears the Greeks were particularly fond of visiting friends, enjoying food and drink and networking with each other. In Book 1 of the Republic, Socrates was on his way back to Athens when he was stopped by an old friend named Polemarchus. He persuades Socrates to come visit, and they meet with Cephalus, Polemarchus' wealthy father, and another friend visiting named Thrasymachus. Cephalus and Socrates, being of a similar age, discuss the burdens of becoming old, and Cephalus admits that his wealth has made living much easier for him. Cephalus claims that his wealth also allows him to speak the truth and to pay his debts that are owed. This piques Socrates' interest, and he begins a conversation of justice. Let us listen in as Socrates argues with Cephalus and Polemarchus.
Beautifully spoken, Cephalus. But I always say that justice or right is simply to speak the truth and to pay back any debt one may have contracted? Or are these actions sometimes right and sometimes wrong? I mean this sort of thing, for example. Everyone would surely agree that if a friend had deposited weapons with you when he was sane, and then asked for them upon his return when he is out of his mind, you would not return them. The man who returns them is not doing right, I say, nor is one who is willing to tell the whole truth to such a man in such a state correct. What you do say is correct. This is then, by definition, not a right or a justice, namely to tell the truth or to pay one's debts. It certainly is. But if we are to put in any trust, it would be in the great Greek philosopher Simonides. And now I must leave the argument to you both, for I must go back and look after the sacrifice.
Plato uses the Republic in his other writings to explain his philosophy of justice. Plato was very fond of allegory, and in another dialogue called Phaedrus, he discusses the human soul by employing the metaphor of a charioteer. The charioteer has his handles on the reins and is desperately trying to control his horses. The black horse represents the appetitive nature of man. It wishes to satisfy all earthly pleasures and is driven by desire. The white horse represents the moral impulses that are trying to do the right thing above all cost. The charioteer himself represents the intellect or reason controlling the two other powerful forces. This same idea can also be represented by the human body. The brain being the intellect, the heart being the spirit of the person, and the stomach being the driving force of the appetite. We have seen this imagery before. It bears a striking resemblance to Sigmund Freud's concepts of id, ego, and superego. Plato claims that there is a human animal. We are driven by force to do just and unjust things. When there is harmony or balance of the reason, spirit, and appetite, and all the forces agree to allow the intellect to control action, a person will act justly. A just person will experience happiness. When the three parts of the soul are imbalanced, then the person acts unjustly and cannot find happiness.